Hey, my name is Robert. I am the campus pastor here at the Erwin campus. We are continuing our series on acceptable sins, and it looks like all of us are old enough to step into today's topic. But I'm going to make this announcement here, and I'm going to say it one more time just in case somebody slips in. Children's ministry is open. We are stepping into a topic today that's maybe a touch more sensitive, and so as we look into that, we want to we're going to be talking about lust today, and we're going to navigate that as best we can from a stage and where we're videoed, but we also want to be sure if kids are in here that parents know that. Like I said, looks like we're fine in this service, but we'll go from there. Hey, as you came in, you saw a QR code on the seat in front of you. If you are a regular attender, we always want to encourage you to scan that, make sure if there's something we can be praying for you about, something that's going on, you can put that in the comments section down there. Just put your name, maybe your cell phone or email in, and that way we make sure we know who we're praying for. But you can drop that in and send that to us. And then also, if you're a first-time guest, thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out with us. You can scan that same QR code, fill out as much information as you feel comfortable, and we will get in touch with you and just let you know information about what we do here at the Erwin campus of Northridge. So 2 announcements, and then we'll have our bumper video pop up here. One, I think last week I said it was on a Sunday, but that's what happens when you don't read a calendar well, apparently. The family skate night is on March 6th, so I had the date correct, but that is a Monday night. So Monday night, March 6th, a week from tomorrow, schedule your orthopedic appointment now. It is family skate night. You can go and hang out and have a great time. All 3 Northridge campuses will be there. That's at the Johnson City Family Skate Park over there. So you can go get your skate on and have a fantastic time and do that. And then one other announcement today. On March 15th, we are having, and I wish Gary and I have texted about this, and we've not spoken in person, and my redneck sometimes jacks up words, especially when they're Greek and Hebrew. So koinonia, I think is the way you can say it. It's on the, there's a sign out there, or some posters out there. If you work somewhere, you can hang one of those up. It is really a community, just prayer and worship event. It's just going to be a night. I think Gary said they've got about 8 songs put together. If I do anything, it will be less than what I have said right now. It's not going to be a night of preaching and things like that, but it'll be scripture reading. There's people doing some spoken word. I think somebody's going to be painting during the worship set. It's very much kind of an arts kind of expressive thing. If you're like, oh, that's not my thing, that used to not be my thing, and I absolutely love it now. It is really just a great space. You get a chance to sit, to reflect, to sing, to just take in. And so it's going to be something really special. God's been putting this into Gary's heart, and he and I have been praying through some things together collectively for a while now. And this is just something that I'm really excited about, that God's kind of brought this to a kind of a point here where we get to do this. So March 15th, that'll be a Wednesday night. You can be here and do that. And so they're going to play a bumper video, and then we'll dive into today's sermon. Hey, so this is not an easy topic, and it may be easier for some than others. One of the first churches I worked at as a youth pastor at, the pastor was preaching one Sunday morning, and he said, men, I know 99% of you, I know what your struggle is. The other 1% is lying. And so I think traditionally this topic, this conversation has been something that we have stepped into and looked at from a thing that men struggle with lust, men struggle with porn, men struggle with sexual addictions, and women have no struggle at all. And it's something that over the last few years, we have seen, Melissa and I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of conversations, and even recently, and if you ever are interested in some crazy, deep conversations, a lot of them wrapped around faith and stuff like that, you holler at us. We'd love to tell you the podcast we listen to if you want to dive into that journey. But one in particular recently, just lady was talking, and she just said, I struggled with this my whole life. She's like, I literally was in Bible college, and I was getting a degree and was going through this thing, and I was like a year in, and I couldn't keep up, and I just was in a bad spot, and I actually got kicked out of school because they found her on porn. They found her on these sites, and so she got kicked out of school. She didn't know what else to do, and she was going to be a doctor and decided, well, if this is where I'm at, if I'm never going to be able to kick this, I'll go be a porn star. And so she felt like the only gap between where she was going to be as a doctor and where she was now was to go to that space. And thankfully, unfortunately, she had some things happen in her life that she had to, she went back home, but she didn't have to tell her mom. But so she still struggled a little bit. God did some things in her life and in her heart. She ended up back in a Bible college, not as a porn star. And she said it was much harder to figure out back then. It was not probably as easy as it is now for kids to get into. But it's just been an absolute journey for me, kind of prepping this and putting this together. And so thank you guys for always journeying with me on this stuff. I said this earlier, I never know how much of my story to tell. I actually don't have a ton of my story in here, but we'll see where God lands on this thing. And so we opened up week 1 talking about gluttony. Week 2, we talked about lying. And last week, Jim talked about greed. And so I want to read this verse that I think goes with all 4 of these, and even what we're going to talk about next week. It's going to be up here on the screen. In Psalms 139, just says this. It says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." This verse and just how we think, and I think this is the space and the spot that we want to sit in. God, know my heart, which he does. Test me and know. David's writing this. It's Psalms 139. And know my anxious thoughts. For you, this conversation today may not be your anxious thought. It might have been gluttony. It might have been greed last week. It might be busyness that we're going to talk about next week. And you just said, wow, I think I got COVID next Sunday. I will not be here. Because I don't know about you, but I'm busy and I don't love it all the time. And I'm trying to figure out this balance of COVID to about 3 years ago where we just sat at home and watched Netflix. And I'm going, I kind of like this. Then you get bored of that after like a week and a half. And then you're going, what's this balance? What's this thing? So next week we're diving into that. And so God, what's my anxious thoughts? What are the things that are holding me back? What are the things that are really kind of captivating me? See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way. We've talked about The Mandalorian, kind of ripped that off. It was that really how the original Christ followers talked about following Jesus. It was the way. It was the way they lived. It was the way they acted, how they were obedient to God and to Christ and in their life. And David, it kind of even continues to remember that. It's how it was said in the Old Testament as well. And so we're going to start things out with this a touch different. And the reason I didn't want a lot of young kids in here is we're going to show a couple of images. And they're by far the most sensual images that we've ever put on a screen. And I just always want to be sure that when we're doing these types of things that, we're stepping into a really hard conversation here. And I just want to kind of prep the way for that as best I can. So Josh, if you'll put the first one up here. That is a Canon R3. It shoots 30 frames a second, costs $6,000 for just the camera body. You actually can't use it when you get it. It just sits there for $6,000, and I lay in bed thinking about it at night. Like it is something, let's just move to the next one here. That is a Canon C300 Mark III. I have the C100 version of that. The camera body, just the body, again, you can't use it. at all. All it is, you don't have a card. There's no way to record anything to it. There's no CF or SD cards in it. There's no external hard drives. There's nothing hooked to that to even record anything. It comes with no lens. It's like $12,000. The 30 to 300 lens on the front of that is $45,000. I just dream about shooting films and holding that camera and carrying it with me and walking around and telling it it's pretty. And it really does kind of like captivate me. That rig right there is somewhere in the $145,000, $150,000. And that's not the most expensive camera I could have put up there. I just like Canon a lot. So one more. Here we go. These babies, I love them so much. If you come in on the top there, the second one in on the left, I own that. And Melissa thought that it was going to replace her in bed when I first got it. I would carry it around. I'd sit it by my chair. It would just be next to me in the kitchen, and I would eat dinner with it, and we would talk to each other, and we would do these things. And I love this stuff. Like I've talked about before, and I've had a really cool career as far as like I had some fun. I've got friends that own like everything up there, and it's exhausting. That's well over like $250,000 worth of just glass. You can't do anything with it other than hold it if you don't have a camera to click it onto. And now they've made all these mirrorless that goes with these things. There's another $200,000 or $300,000 worth of lenses there, and part of those are cinema grade and part of them not. See, you don't care about 80% of what I just said, but it occupies my time. And my heart leans in. And for some of you, when you walk into somebody's house and they have the perfect little knickknacks sitting around and their house is decorated perfectly, your heart just goes, I wish my place was like that. And you look into some people and they drive down the road and they're in a new truck and you go, I wish I had that truck. I wish I had that SUV. I wish I had that minivan. And all of us sit in these different spaces. We all sit in these places to where what our heart gravitates towards. Because see, when we think about lust, when we think about all of these spaces and these things that we do, we typically want to dive in to only thinking about sexual, but lust is an intense longing for. And while we're going to spend a lot of our time today on the sexual and talking through that part, I want you to go, I just don't want you to sit here and go today like, hey, well, when Robert's reading through this, we're going to be spending most of our time in Genesis, talking about Joshua, and is Robert's journeying through that. I want you to go, cool, not my jam. That's not the thing I struggle with, and I know that some of you don't. And so you're going to feel like it's a Sunday off, but I want you to think about the fact of like what I put up there. Like when I was living in my career and when I was doing that at like full time every day, you can ask my family. Like I would walk around talking about, and I would send them text messages of things that I would find on Facebook Marketplace or somewhere, and I'm going, do you think I can afford? And they're like, no, you cannot. We had to sell our house, and you still couldn't afford part of the stuff you're wanting to do, because that's just where things go, is your heart you want, and you're not content. And you're in a place where it's like, oh man, I really enjoy this, and I really love that, but my heart's not content at the place with what I have. I need just a little bit more. It's what Jim talked about last week. It's the assumption that it's all for our consumption. And if my friends have this camera, if my friends have this, then why shouldn't I have that? And the struggle is so many times, is whether it's TV shows that we want to watch, or cars, or home decor, or sexual desires. Our heart shifts to this intense longing that we do. And so, because when it comes to intense longing, we tend to think the heart wants what the heart wants. And we've all heard that phrase, the heart wants what the heart wants. And while I think Emily Dickinson should get the credit for it, I'm going to read you this quote from John Mark Comer from his book talking about it. And it says, this off-the-cuff saying has entered not only the vernacular, but also the belief system of our generation. It's become a kind of self-perpetuating justification for anything from adultery to chocolate cake. A kind of get-out-of-jail-free card for any behavior that falls outside the lines of moral tradition. Yet very few people realize its origin story. So Emily Dixon, I think, like I said, should get the credit for this. Dickerson, I say things wrong sometimes, but I don't typically read her books. But Woody Allen actually gets credit for this. From a pretty nasty, notorious affair with Soon-Yi Previn. In his interview with Walter Isaacson in 1992, Allen refusing to really say that he had done anything wrong. And this is kind of why the world was concerned about it, because at the time he was 56 and she was 21 when the affair came to light. And all he could say is, the heart wants what the heart wants. They were married in 97. They're still married today. But at that point in time, his wife then, who this is her adopted daughter, and the story that goes and how it all played. And at like one point in time, I think, like as they were together, he could have been like an uncle and a father, and she could have been an aunt. And it's a very complicated story there. But the heart wants what the heart wants. And a lot of times we'll say these things very flippantly, and we'll step into these comments, and somebody says that, and we'll just go, maybe. I want to look at Leviticus really quick. Leviticus 18, verses 1 through 5. It'll be on the screen, and then we'll spend the rest of our time in Genesis. It says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you to. Do not follow their practices. You must obey my laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. Here's what God's saying. Don't act like culture. Don't act like the town you're from. And don't act like the town you're going to. I remember, I don't think I've said this here, I remember very specifically, we moved from Alabama to Virginia right as I was transitioning from middle school to high school. And I'm a much better student now than I was then. I wasn't the best student. I didn't love school. But I talked all the time. And so when you don't do your homework and you never shut up, you are not a teacher's favorite person. No teacher's going, yay, Robert's back in class. And I remember moving and my mom looking at me, and just before I went to school the first day when we'd moved to Virginia, and she says, you get a chance to start something new here. You don't have to live the old. You don't have to lean into who you were. I need you to lean into something different. I need you to be unique. I need you to be set apart. That's what God's saying here through Moses. What he's saying is he's like, hey, I don't want you to act like the fools you just left. And I don't want you to act like the fools you're getting ready to meet. I want you to be unique and set apart. I want you to be something special. And the interesting thing is that as this passage continues, if you read on inside of Leviticus 18 here, there are 19 different sexual sins that come up. All that are still very relevant and active today. And if we looked at those and we found the thing that we struggled with in there, sometimes we would go, 18 out of 19 ain't bad. If a baseball player can make a career hitting 3 out of 10, if I go like 96%, I'm in really good shape. I'm honoring God like big time. I'm better than anybody I know if I'm at 96%. And immediately right before we have to go back, God's not asking for part. He's asking for all. But we also have to be careful, because here's the struggle. Here's the bump. Here's the tension. When we start to pull the one thing that we are okay with and say, we're going to leave the 18. What happens to when somebody else comes up and says, well, that's not my struggle. Like, that one's silly. You shove that back in the list. I want to pull this one out. And then we step into these ideas and these phrases of, well, let's tell you what, if that's how everybody's going to feel, then let's just follow our heart. You do you, boo. Just do it, whatever you feel like. Speak your truth. Or the heart wants what the heart wants. And when we start to dilute and take away from what God says, it starts to create a shift in culture, which has led to a lot of the place that we are now, especially inside of sexuality and sin. So here's what I want to say this really quick. The goal of today is not guilt. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you're going through. I only know what I'm facing and a few stories that maybe my kids and maybe a couple of friends in here that we've talked about. I don't know anybody else in the room. So unless you have told me something, I know nothing. So this sermon was not written for you unless you need it. This isn't about guilt. This isn't about trying to create stress. This isn't trying to make you to a point that you're just like, man, I can't do this church thing anymore if this is what's expected. This is just about pointing out in Scripture where God desires us to be. A story that happened that we get a chance to kind of look at and to understand that God's desire for us is the changing of our mind. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Renewing our mind, changing how we think. Like pushing out of our heart, out of our soul, the things that hurt the heart of God. And so with that, we're going to dive in to Genesis chapter 39. We're going to start in verse 2. We'll end up around verse 12 or 13. And so we're going to jump in here, and it says, the Lord was with Joseph. So Joseph, if you don't know his story, real quick, Joseph was daddy's favorite. And if you have siblings and you're not the favorite, you understand all of his siblings. You would want to do. So they took and they put up with it as long as they could, and they took Joseph and they sold him. They were going to kill him, and then one of the brothers like, come on, this seems extreme. And so one talked the other few off the ledge, and they sold him. They sold him to a bunch of gypsies that were just traveling through, and they kept the original coat of many colors. Now Dolly has one, and so Joseph has one, and Dolly has one, and so two pretty important people in most of our lives have a coat of many colors here. And so they took the coat, and they're like, Father, look what's happened. He's been destroyed. Oh no, it's terrible. He's gone missing, and he's dead, and these kids, blah, blah, blah. And so it's just been a horrible situation. And so he ends up in this space and this moment and this story. So as he gets sold, he's bouncing through with the gypsies, and he ends up here, and he has this. He says the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, that's important, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted him to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. So journey this for a minute. You've got a guy who's got all the juice in the world here. Like he can do anything he wants to. This guy's Potiphar is absolute monster in this town. Like everything he has, he's like, the only thing I don't worry about is the only thing I take care of myself is what I eat. I don't make Joseph put food physically in my mouth. Joseph handles everything else that goes on. I want you to think about having that much power, that much ability, that much trust. And it came because Potiphar said, I could tell that God is with him. I can tell he trusts God. I can tell he's following God. I can tell he's putting his priority in that space. But then the plot starts to thicken. Y'all are very pretty. I remember being younger and thinner, It was nice feeling like you were a touch more handsome maybe than you are now. I mean, you remember those moments where you felt like you could walk into a room, you're like, I'm in fighting shape. I'm a decent looking human. I'm there. Joseph has apparently a little more ability than most. He's fit and well built and handsome. And after a while, people took notice. And the lady of the house took notice and did not pull any punches. Was like, hey, let's go hang out a little bit. Potiphar's out. We got some time. Let's spend some time together. And so here's the thing that I just want to kind of hit a couple things on this. The problem with lust is that you desire pleasure without a promise. See, lust is the plan that comes from the attraction. Think about lust in your life. Think about when you grab a hold of something in that space, and all of a sudden something starts to draw your heart's attention. We talked about cameras and people's houses and cars, and you've got stuff that's probably way more simple than some of these bigger things. Those are pretty obvious things. But talking about sexual attraction here and talking about this is that lust is the plan that comes from the attraction. We see somebody, we're attracted. We don't care about what our situation is or their situation is. All we want is the attraction to lead to interaction. And that's when we start to step into this space and we create a problem. And that's why the problem with lust is that you desire pleasure without the promise. And then lust says, I want something from you, but not you. Think about that. Typically, when we have a lustful situation in something that our minds are gravitating and drifting and going towards someone else, whether that's a person, whether that's a website, whether that's something that's there, all we want is something from that situation, not them in particular. We're not interested in necessarily upheaving our life. We just want the extra that could come through the thoughts, the ideas, the mental dialogue, the physical touch that we start to create, the things that we start to do that leads into that space. Any of us who've given into lust knows where it leads. Lust oftentimes fills us with regret, remorse, shame, brokenness, emptiness, because it's not what God originally designed. And we've all been there. And we've all sat in that space. And it's not one of those things that because we've all been there, let's just all say it's okay, let's circle up, sing Kumbaya, and go home, and we won't talk about it anymore. It's something that because we've all been there, because we've all sat in that space, because we know the hurt, the shame, the regret that it causes, the damage that it creates, we need to step in and live like Joseph and be more committed. And so in verses 8 and 10, we're going to see pop up here, it says, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he's entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Not against Potiphar. Think about that. When he gets to the place that he starts to have the conversation, he doesn't say, how can I do such a wicked thing and hurt Potiphar? His concern is, I'm sinning against God. And I will promise you this, that in our lives, when we step in, if our goal is to honor God with what we do, what we say, what we think, how we act, it will flow through the rest of life. I'm not saying people aren't going to be offended. I'm not saying there won't even be some hard times. But I'm saying that the answers that we're able to give are much more clear, concise, and helpful. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. So he's like, I'm even going to be in the room. I'm not even going to put myself in this spot. I'm not even going to stand in a place where this happens and it starts to create this tension and stuff. I'm removing myself from this situation. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in a spot where you had to go, I can't do this. I cannot be in a room here. I cannot be around this substance. I cannot be around these cameras. I can't be around this thing, this person, this idea, this concept, this reality, because I ain't strong enough. And I'm not capable. Joseph will seem to be strong enough. But what he was smart enough to know is that you can't fight it forever. Eventually, when you continue to walk into the middle of the hurt, the struggle, the sin, the pain, you can be, look how strong I am for a period of time. But eventually, you're going to fall. So Joseph makes the right decision. Everything works out, right? Verse 11. So one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him, Potiphar's wife, by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. I mean, she's relentless. I mean, we are not letting up. This is absolutely what's going to happen. She's like, this is the time. No one's in the house. This is it. Grabs the cloak, but he ran, left his cloak in her hand, and ran out of the house. Let me finish the story real quick here. So he runs out of the house. She's embarrassed, angry. I mean, she's like, I'm the wife of, an absolute player in this town. Like, Potiphar has money, servants, plural. This guy has everything, and I am his, which means I get what I want. We've all seen this TV show before. If we're older, we watched Dallas when we were younger. We know what happens. If you're younger, you've seen the OC. You understand what happens in this space when somebody has the power, one spouse has the power, and the other one is theirs, so they have equal power. And they get to own everything. She's embarrassed, angry, mad. So she goes and takes the coat to Potiphar and says, Joseph made a pass at me. Joseph tried to take me. I was able to flee, but as I screamed and as he was in a hurry and he ran out, he forgot his coat. And he left this in the house here. Potiphar was actually a little bit torn. Like, I can't believe this. But I got the proof. So Joseph went from all the power in the world to prison, just like that. And that's the thing about when our hearts start to align to what the problem is. See, we may not go to physical prison by doing the right thing. And by doing the wrong thing, you may not go to prison physically. But the emotional, the mental prison that you sit in, trying to keep the lies straight, trying to make sure you always say the right thing, trying to make sure that you always put this in. And this is one of those things we talked about last week, is that you can't fight the devil in the dark. You've got to keep things in the open. Joseph was open, and he can't control the fact that somebody said something somebody with so much power said something so grossly wrong about him. But he was constantly aligned with where God wanted him. Here's a couple of thoughts as we start to finish up here. What you feed grows, and what you starve dies. What you feed grows, and what you starve dies. Some of you are having gardening nightmares right now. It is like, I cannot grow anything, Robert. What do you mean? And so, but the reality comes down to that when you are trying to grow something, when you feed it, I've got 3 teenage boys. Trust me, when you feed them, they grow. They were this tall just 6 months ago, and now they're all as tall as I am. If you've had kids in your house, you understand how quickly feeding and growing happens. And just this reality comes down to the fact that it requires a lot from us to feed the things in our head. What you think about, you drift towards. What you set your mind on, you move to. That's why it's constant conversation throughout Scripture of And then he started to change how he thinks, basically. Romans 12. Changing your mind. Constantly changing how you think and what you do. Secrecy fuels the power of addiction. I've told my boys for years when we talk about dating and relationships and those types of things, dating is not a recreational sport. It has a purpose. It has an end game. And just like that, lust is not a pastime. It's a pathway, and it leads somewhere. If you continue to set your heart and your mind and your attention on things that are against the heart of God that will hurt you, it will lead you somewhere. Sorry. The band's going to come back up. I just want to say a couple of things here as I finish. I think about my life, and like I said, all I can speak to is me. I can't speak to you. I don't know your story. I don't know anything about that. But I read a book several years ago called Deadly Vipers by Judd Wilhite and Craig Gross. And in this, Judd was telling this story and talking through, and he said, you know, I love pizza, but I couldn't tell you the first slice of pizza I had. He said, I love movies and I love ice cream, but I can't tell you the first film I saw or the first cup of ice cream, even what flavor it was, much less when it was. He said, but I can tell you the first time I ever saw an image in a magazine or on a website. And I'll just tell you, if you feel like you need to talk about my story, come to me. I'll tell you my story. I absolutely love pizza, ice cream, and movies, and I loved how he said those things. But I can tell you where I was sitting in 8th grade when a group of guys, we were getting ready for basketball practice. I could put you on the bleachers. I could tell you every guy that was sitting in the circle. I can tell you the picture that was on the magazine. And I can tell you that it created thoughts and it created things, and I wish I could tell you that I went and I told somebody that, hey, I saw this isn't helpful for me. I wish I could tell you that I just immediately squashed this and it never affected my life. But the reality is it was kind of the opposite. I grew up in a really, really, really religious family. We went to kind of a King James only, Southern Gospel only type of church. You fought everything in the dark. You didn't let anyone know anything. You constantly sat in a space where you had to be fearful. How could you do that? How could God love you if that's the kind of stuff you're going to look at, you're going to do? Thankfully, I did grow up in a house where we didn't have internet and stuff back then. And I grew up in a house, where there wasn't access to that type of content. But it put my mind down a path, and I remember later in life being around people who had those types of things and being able to see stuff, and it shaped my mind, and it shaped my heart. And it changed who I wanted to be. And it created a path that over time, I ended up having to kind of fight some things in a very different way with some people to get through. And Chris and I both talk about, like, you've kind of got a pastor with a past and things, and, you know, I didn't go to jail. Chris went to jail. So, I mean, that makes me a little bit better than him, aren't I? But all of us have a story. You've got a story. If I give you the microphone, you could tell a story. And I don't say any of that to go like, hey, look, it's cool. It's not. I wish I could do anything to not have been there in those moments and kind of delayed. And we've done that. But 3 things I just want to tell you as I get ready to pray. I told you earlier, today hasn't been an intentional attack. We all have sin that we struggle with. And if lust is yours, you've got a group of people here that love you and care about you. Second, like Joseph, you got to flee. Drive it like you stole it, even though stealing's another sin. But like in the moment, just get out, get there, go, get gun, move away. And third, and I've said this for weeks now, and I don't know, Jim said it, and I've said it, and Gary's talked about it. You can't do this on your own. You think you can. And you think you can because you're embarrassed. You think it's fun telling these stories up here? No, I mean, it is not. It is not what I wake up going, yay, I get to tell my worst moments in front of all of my friends, and we get to go live that out, and then they get to go hide their worst moments. And I don't need you to tell me yours. If you need to tell me something, I'd love to hear it. But I just want you to know that you can't do this on your own. But you have a family that is here for you. It seems silly. We had deacons here yesterday because we had something happen on the roof. And I promise you, if they're going to show up in a downpour and fix our roof, I know for a fact these guys care way more about you and about your spiritual health than they do this building. So you can't do this on your own. You're going to lose that fight. And if it's not lust, if it's not gluttony, greed, lying, busyness, if there's something else, let us know. Because I want to pray with you. I want to be here with you in this. Let's pray and we'll worship some more. God, I just want you to know that I'm so thankful for how you've worked in my life, for what you've done. And I wish that I could say that certain things hadn't happened or certain things hadn't gone. But God, you have been faithful and you have cared and you have journeyed with me. And I've watched you journey with my family. I've watched you journey with my friends. And I've watched you be faithful in those moments when we were extremely unfaithful to you. So God, today, I don't know what's going on in my friends' lives or in their hearts, but God, if there's something that you are asking them to let go of, if there is something that they are holding on to, if there is a lust, a passion, something they are desiring in their heart that goes against you, God, I just pray that you work, that you move. Put someone in their life that they can share this with. It's the right person that will help them navigate. God, we thank you. Pray this in your name. Right before I walk away, we're doing communion today. Sorry, I got distracted there at the end. We have a station in the front and a station in the back. We don't really, honestly, some of these things we get pretty intentional about. This one here we were working through and people were speaking and things were going, and this is just where this landed. But I can't think of, when I think about doing this in remembrance of me, when I think about why we take communion, to remember what God did for us, what he freed us from, what he established this for was for hope. And so today, if maybe it's the first time you've done communion with us, we do a thing called open communion, which means that if you have a relationship with Jesus, if you're a Christ follower, if you've been saved, however you heard that as you were growing up, you are free to join us. The band's going to do 2 songs. Just during that time, as you feel led, you take and walk and go and just grab and sit up here, back there, however it works. Take it back to your seat. Circle up with your family and pray, whatever you want to do. But this is just a time for us to reflect and what God's done for us and to remember what he did, what he's doing, and what he will continue to do for us. Let's stand and worship together this morning.